Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're going to start momentarily. We're just waiting for people to log in. Thanks for your patience. What do you say, Brian? Are you ready to get this conversation started?
Sounds good to me. Let's go.
Okay. By way of introduction, my name is John Capello. I'm a major account leader located in Southern California. I have the responsibility and pleasure of managing some of GitLab's larger, more strategic accounts that often use GitLab to the fullest extent. So it's been a pleasure to work with these organizations and see how different organizations in different industries use GitLab for software development, firmware development, security, infrastructure, and more. Brian?
Hi, folks. My name is Brian Ross. I'm part of the field CTO team here at GitLab. We act as trusted advisors to some of GitLab's largest and most interesting customers. Everyone in my team has held senior leadership positions, so we've all got some industry experience. We've not spent all of our time in vendor land. For my part, I formed and led the technology products division at Sky TV. They're a Comcast subsidiary for folks in the States. Where my teams provide the various cloud platforms underpinned their TV, broadband, mobile propositions across the UK, Ireland, and Europe. But yeah, these days I'm working in GitLab, just helping customers understand how to get the most from technology. And surprise, surprise, that's not all about the tech. That's often about people, culture, process, which I think we'll be chatting about a little bit today.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. So, to frame up the conversation for today's webcast, there are various ways to think about team structures within a development organization. And that can often vary based on organization size, their complexity, culture, available budget, and business requirements. So, in today's organizations, it's fairly common to see SRE teams, DevOps teams, application security teams, and platform engineering teams, and more. So, Brian, as someone that has the opportunity to work with lots of organizations, you bring a nice lens on ideas of how to optimize organizational structures, as well as what organizations should potentially avoid doing. So, in today's discussion, we'll be talking about what's the right and maybe the wrong way to deliver tooling and process to your respective organization, and what you've seen to be successful with, high performing platform engineering organizations. So we found these webcasts to be of great value when the audience is interactive. We encourage the audience to ask questions throughout this discussion. That said, please ask all of your questions via the Q&A feature within Zoom and not the chat feature in Zoom. We're also going to be doing a few polls throughout the conversation. So please let us know your thoughts. We're interested to get your thoughts on these polls. So with that, Brian, let's get into the conversation. Um, in your role as a field CTO for GitLab, you have the opportunity to see how different companies and different industries operate and adapt their development practices to meet the demands of a particular business requirement. In your experience, how are the more advanced development organizations thinking about structuring their teams? And specifically, how do they draw the lines of demarcation between SRE teams, DevOps teams, and platform engineering teams and beyond?
So don't let my boyish good looks fool you. I've been around in IT long enough to have named engineering roles after DevOps and SRE platforms and all things in between. So I think maybe the important part is to talk about what these roles have in common and then maybe what differentiates them. So first and foremost, all we're trying to do usually with these types of roles is to find ways of getting different teams, specialists, to work together more smoothly. And they've all been attempts at doing that in one shape or another. So if we think about SRE first, that was kind of Google's approach for modernizing the operations to better define the interface with developers. So moving away from the old world of throwing things over the wall and hoping that everything is going to work and having a big blame contest at the end. So SRE was a much more mature way of approaching that, thinking about things like error budgets and all that good stuff. And if anyone is interested in that, obviously Google wrote an entire book on how you can do that. Following that, we found that the launch of DevOps and Agile alongside it. DevOps was a slightly different approach to the same problem of getting developers and operators to work better together. With DevOps, what we wanted to do is bring developers and engineers into a single team, ideally, and focus them around some type of stream-aligned value. In other words, get everyone closer to the output rather than dealing with tickets and things like that. Now, the benefits is that DevOps really did work. Bringing people together is always a great idea, and having them aligned to business value meant we got things out the door faster. The problem we've seen, though, is adopting that at scale, first of all, gets kind of pricey because you have developers and operators in every single team, maybe some security people, maybe some Q&A people. Like it gets really expansive. The other problem is that DevOps teams are traditionally empowered to focus on local optimization. So what can they do to make their tools and processes as efficient as possible for their use case? Now, first glance, that's a brilliant idea, but when you start looking at a larger organization, well, sometimes those local optimizations might not be in line with the global maximum. So, in other words, what happens with things like corporate policy or corporate structures or goals that we want to achieve as a whole, they can sometimes get a bit lost in DevOps. And so enter platform engineering. And without going on a full monologue on that, I think the platform engineering is just another way of trying to get the same value as we looked for in DevOps, but in a slightly different way. We have a centralized platform team that has a very well defined interface for developers and one that is much more around developing something as a product. So it's about really aiming at that human aspect while still kind of working in the way that large organizations tend to be structured. So that's my high level overview of what I've seen over the last kind of 10, 15 years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think this is probably an opportune time for organizations out there that actually have built out their platform engineering team. Why don't we do a quick poll? So, what is the primary driver for platform engineering in your organization? We're going to post this poll. If you wouldn't mind answering that, that would be fantastic. Okay, let's see here. Let's see if we can see some of these results. Okay. So standardized tooling and processes, 25% of the participants' response. Increased developer productivity, 67%. Enhanced security and compliance, actually zero. Reduce operational cost. What are your thoughts on this, Brian? Does this kind of match what you've seen throughout the industries and different organizations?
It does. It does. So I think we all want to try and do things better, and that usually means faster. And both from an individual perspective, but also from a company level as well, right? We're all under stress and pressure to do more with the same or more with less. So I think when we think about developer productivity, we all want to be more productive. I think the big challenge is how do we do that, right? How do we squeeze more out of it? How can we spend less time doing the toil type work that we've got? And I think there's another important aspect that is tied into productivity, and that is around how do we look after our top talent? So if we have developers that are great people, they're really good at what they do, how can we ensure they're spending their time doing the right type of work and not the type of thing that's gonna bore them or make them mad? Like nobody likes meetings, right? So how can we really focus them on the thing that the heavy lifting, the parts that really make a differentiated improvement to the business. So that's a common theme that I see, both on, as I say, on the company side, just doing more with less and being more focused, but also on an individual side and a team manager side, looking after our people. And it's one of the things that I've really enjoyed in IT, that we begin to think about more about this human aspect of IT and not just bringing another tool in or more technology. I am a little surprised to see security and compliance not there, because I know you're not all happy with security and compliance. Either you're not doing enough of it or you're doing too much of it. But it's interesting that's not been listed. But I think that the other one there is standardizing tools and processes. I think that comes in part with productivity, right? If we're all working in these different ways, like I said, with different DevOps teams, we've got our own tools, our own processes, our own way of doing things. We end up incredibly siloed. We can't really help each other because we've got this incompatibility almost, and a kind of a lack of transparency as well about what's going on in this other team. And that's one of the big things that I see in large enterprise. They have got rooms full of really smart people, but sometimes team A doesn't realize that team B has already built something that does most of what they want. So it's how do we start kind of aligning these teams in a way that fits the bigger business? How about
Yeah.
yourself, John? Obviously, you've been out the road as well. I've been focusing mostly on the European market where security compliance, data sovereignty is massive. But over in the States, is it a different kind of a different tack that you see with companies taking? Is it more around the operational cost and hard lines, or is it around the same?
The human element is largely the same, whether it's in the United States and in Europe. And as you were giving that answer, one thing that I think of is one word, empathy. And I think it's really important for a platform engineering team to have a high degree of empathy with their business partners that they're delivering these services to. And I think what's really beneficial is really understanding what a day in the life of a developer looks like, or a day in the life of a security or application security engineer looks like. When you really understand what they're looking to accomplish, why they're looking to accomplish it, I think platform engineering teams tend to be a lot more successful, because they can understand how they can build guardrails, how they can build governance, how they can build security, and allowing those development teams to go much faster. But as you were speaking and answering that question, that's kind of one thought that comes to mind is empathy, and it's the human element. The humans are typically the most challenging part of technology and process, right?
Well, I'm certainly not going to complain too much. It's kept me in meaningful work for quite some time.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I think the humans are much more fascinating than the tech. I think we stopped having technology problems a while ago. Now it's just how do we make this as a tool for us people to do better work together.
Yeah. Along the same kind of lines here, how might one design a platform engineering team and the solutions that, one, that balance developer autonomy with, two, organizational governance, while allowing for innovation across the enterprise? And what I'm kind of really getting at, one thing I see a lot here is, I think of this question as being more relevant as organizations begin to explore and or expand the use of AI in development, security, and operation. So how do you see the striking the right balance of governance with developer autonomy?
So I think the first thing is that layer of empathy you talked about, right? So we all need to remember that although different teams may have a different focus than we do and a different set of skills, we all come to work to do the right thing. And I think the secret of platform engineering is to make the right thing the easiest thing because we are all fundamentally lazy. We want to get past the boring bits of our jobs so we can focus on the good parts. And developers and operators and security people are no different. So, with that in mind, um, I think it's important to understand that security, compliance, governance, and all of those things that perhaps are perceived as objects that slow us down, things that are in our way, they're a feature of our business and a really important part. And the anecdote that I usually, story I usually lean on when I'm talking to new developer teams or platform engineering teams is that like I enjoy driving my car. Like I enjoy sitting in there. I enjoy driving fast on the motorways. Now, the only reason I'm willing to go any speed in the car is because I trust that brake pedal to work when I push it. It's not going to make a funny noise. It's not going to fall off. If I push the brake pedal, I'm going to slow down and I know what to expect as a result. If your car didn't have any brakes, I think you would drive a lot more conservatively. In fact, you probably wouldn't get in the car at all.
I like that
So it's
analogy.
very much a feature of of the business vehicle, in my opinion. So that's the first part. I think the second then is how do we make sure that the security controls that we're putting in place are there for a good reason and they're not annoying? So laboring the kind of story there a little bit too much, but if we think about in a car, some of the new features that I find the car that I've got, eh, they're bordering on annoying. So they're driver assists that sometimes get in the way, and some of those I want to be able to turn off. Some of them I can't, and that's a little bit frustrating. And I think business is kind of similar. We want to make sure we're doing things the right way, but often we don't see the value of them. So whatever we're doing, we need to understand the value for us and for the business. I think that's particularly true for AI, right? Like if we imagine this world where we've got more and more code being generated, our teams are much more productive as a result, either directly or indirectly because of AI. What does that mean for the overall flow of releases to production? So in other words, if the business is driving faster, how do we ensure that we're not going to crash into a wall? And I think that's one of the big things I talk to businesses about just now when they're planning their AI strategy. It's about ensuring that their CI/CD pipelines are following best practice, have good quality gates, have good code reviews, have good security scanning. Like all of these things we've been talking about for a long time, right? They become vital as we move faster. Has that been your experience as well? Is that the same types of conversations? Because I know that every company out there has been asking us about AI incessantly for, months and a year now.
Absolutely. It's the case with AI. It's the case with even just any new tooling that comes into an organization is once again, you have to deeply empathize with the people that you're intended to serve to give the best service, right? So really understanding what they're looking to accomplish, why are they adopting AI in the first place? Do we need AI or do we need this tooling? Why do we need this tooling so that you can deliver that service more effectively to them? If you put a bunch of guardrails and governance that prohibit effective use of that tooling, what good is the investment? What good is the intended outcome, right? So I
Yeah.
think it goes back to empathy. But I often think of, organizational maturity is never a destination, it's always an evolution. Now, I'm wondering if you've seen instances where organizational governance and strict process have limited developers' autonomy and productivity. And if so, what have you seen to be a recommended course correction in how to, get the organization back on track, empathize with your users, and deliver a better service?
And I think this is the rub for most developers working in large organizations, right? Is that we have usually collected over a period of time a large set of controls or governance processes that perhaps don't fit the modern world anymore. Um, And I think this is what we need to be able to do. If we think about the safety in these large organizations, I'm thinking about the simplicities of like firewall rules. Businesses are generally incredibly good at adding new firewall rules. We're not so great when it comes to reviewing and removing old and unneeded firewalls. So if you leave it long enough, you will end up with a firewall that looks like Swiss cheese, and no one's quite sure why that rule's there or whether it's safe to remove, and you go through the painful process of just trying it and looking for the alarm bells, right? I see the same in business process. We have a tendency, particularly in regulated environments or in financial services, etc., where whenever there's been a problem, we decide we're going to fix that problem by putting a new approval step in or a new review step in or something to slow the pipeline down. And that's not a bad thing to do, but we never really go back and review what the impact of that is. So, what I like to do for most development teams when I'm thinking about the process behind their platform teams and what might be useful is looking not just at the how can we improve processes, but what happens between teams or between processes. Because that's normally the part that no one's looking at. We're all looking at what our team does in the system, but we're not looking at the system as a whole. So, especially in financial services, we look for approval steps. And my first question is, when was the last time this approval step resulted in a rejection? And
Hmm.
I am always blown away how many of these approval steps never result in a rejection. It just needs someone to look over it and sign that they've looked at it. And
So
generally speaking, it's a level of governance coverage, but it is adding value. And if it's not, then maybe we need to think about that being different, you know? Does that resonate?
it does. It does. Through the lens of platform engineering, when I love the idea of doing process review and process improvement. Who's part of that process review board? Is that all the platform engineering team? Is it partially the platform engineering team and the consumers of the services so that there's a tight feedback loop and open collaboration? What have you seen to be successful in process review and process improvement?
Without doubt, one of hands down the most useful and fun workshop I have done with customers over the last couple of years have been path to production or value stream workshops. And that is where we bring together everyone involved in releasing software. And I mean people involved in finance, people involved in Q&A, developers, engineers, security people, everybody. Anyone that's got a stake, let's get at least one person from that team involved. And we spend the day like primary school children with a big box of sticky notes and an empty wall. And we just chart out exactly what happens in order to go from an idea to something in production. And the goal is to understand what everybody does and their role, understand all the interfaces between, and how long does each step take and how long does the handover take. And for many businesses, there's a benefit in understanding the process because a lot of the time we haven't really looked at the process as a whole in quite some time. It's just grown and changed organically. But the second and the most vital is that for many orgs, it's the first time all of those teams have actually been in the same room together to talk about how they all work together, about that ecosystem of people. And as we all know, good things happen when people come together. That's when we begin to not just understand some of the functional requirements, but for example, at the end of the exercise, what I like to do is say, okay, you've got three red dots each. What I want you to do is just put a red dot on either the process or the transition between processes that give you some level of emotional pain. Like you
Mhm.
don't need to justify it. We just need to, anything that you just don't like, just a perception that that's where you think something could be better.
Yeah.
That in itself can be incredibly powerful. I think, first of all, for teams to recognize if they get a lot of dots in their process or in their handover, like, oh, that's feedback. And we don't generally do feedback well in large organizations. We're very good at passive aggressive. We're very good at avoiding other teams. We're not great at tackling things head on. And so this type of meeting where we get everyone together to think about that value stream and think about the things we have in common and how we all combine our skills to produce this output, I think that's the most valuable thing that you can do when you're beginning to think platform engineering. And and this comes back to your original point, right? It's about empathy. It's about understanding where we can make improvements because it's about people at the end of the day. It's not about improving deployment speeds from 20 minutes to 15 minutes. It's about understanding all of the bits that go into that deployment so we can make it more successful.
What's interesting, what you said there is bringing everybody, including organizations like finance. It's counterintuitive, but finance is typically going, You need how much money? Why do you need that much money?" But when they can empathize with the problem statement you're trying to solve, they oftentimes have the aha moment, right? Okay, now I see the implications of not investing in this area of the business. So that's really interesting. Bringing
Just
that.
on that last point about finance, I think that's one where not a lot of people really think about finance being part of that problem
Yeah,
space.
yeah.
But if I talk to businesses about, well, we're trying to do agile and we're trying to follow the best practice there, but our finance team still work in a waterfall model. So does the rest of the finance world, right? We have estimates about how much money we're going to make each year. We have estimates about our cash flow. We advertise those to the world, and then we think about what shareholders might want to do as a result, right? One of the best 30 minutes I had in my career was when I bought a coffee for a finance person, and I made a simple deal. I said, "Can you sit me down and teach me how finance works in this organization? And I'll sit you down and answer any questions you have about technology, cloud, and everything in between." So we had this great chat. It turned into a weekly conversation, and I learned so many things. And I think the first one was as simple as the reporting spreadsheet that we were giving them for costs. They were manually fiddling around with that as a spreadsheet and changing the formatting and things because of financial calendar dates. And they didn't realize that I was making the input there programmatically. So I could
Hmm.
just change my script and save them a couple of hours every month of manual effort.
Hmm.
But more importantly, when we think about like how we deliver agile projects from a finance perspective, finance is really simple. Like they just need to understand what the value is of the output compared to the input. And so what I do with finance moving from that conversation was to say, right, well, what I'm going to do is I've got this big budget for the year, but at end of each quarter, I'm going to stop and I'm going to give you three options. We can continue what we're doing based on the value that we've delivered already. We can slow things down if we need to from a company perspective. And what that means is we might deliver less or we might deliver slowly. Or if there is more money in the company because of other projects and the way they're working out, and you like the output so far, we can increase the investment and we can then do things faster or do more things. All of a sudden, finance is now working in a more agile way because we understand the inputs and outputs of finance. And I don't think many organizations are doing that. I think what we do is we just fake it. We ask finance for a big lot of money, and then we do our best to try and manage that in an agile way and still deliver at the end our waterfall objectives. Like
Yeah,
talking to people is by far the best way of getting things done, I think.
I love that story. That's super powerful. I think this is a good time for poll question number two. Which aspect of your development workflow causes the most friction? Let's see what the audience has to say.
I wonder if there's anyone looking for an all of it button.
I'm sure it's out there. By the way, if there's any questions, the Q&A button in the Zoom meeting is the place to ask those. We'd be happy to discuss them.
And you don't need to wait till the end, folks. We can happily we'll work with those throughout the conversation as well. As John said, this is much more fun when it's interactive and not just us shouting at the cloud, right?
All right. The
Interesting.
are in. Developer experience is an obstacle. Okay.
So that's
Hmm.
really interesting, right? I think that shows that some of our experiences that we've had kind of link in with what our audience is finding. That we have lots of teams all kind of working in their own ways, a little bit siloed. And there are aspects there where maybe tools are getting in the way because team A is using tool one and team B is using tool two, and we know that integrating tools is painful at very best. But perhaps most interesting is this story at the very top. Developer experience is an obstacle to productivity. And I think that's been the big change with IT software and this idea of platform engineering and really showing that empathy for developers and what they need to do to get their jobs done. John, before I'll obviously go on a monologue about it as I always do, but from your perspective, does that relate to what you see in customers as well? Because I see a lot of that. That's usually one of the first reasons why a platform team is being spun up is because developers are complaining that it's too hard to get anything done around here.
Yeah. It's interesting to see answers around developer experience is an obstacle to productivity, right? Oftentimes, the intended outcome is counterproductive to what they're trying to do. And I think it goes back to really understanding your user, what they're looking to accomplish, what tooling they need, what is their process. Um, it's interesting to kind of to see that that was towards the top. I can also appreciate having too much tooling. Where do I go and find this tooling? How do I consume it? How do I get access to it? How long do I have to wait? I have a deadline that's due on Friday. It's Monday. I don't even have access to the tooling, nor do I know who to contact. So I can appreciate much of those answers. Once again, I don't. I also probably think it's not specific to one vertical, one business vertical, or one type of organization. I just think these are universal challenges that people need to work through. So, um, not a huge surprise, but humans tend to be the same around the world.
Very true, very true. Just before we dive into much, to see we've got a question there from Alan in the Q&A, just about our last point on this idea of a path to prod workshop or a value stream workshop. And the question is, um, how do you set something like that up, especially as organizations become larger? And that's a really good question because when we try and get lots of people in a room, it's usually pretty difficult to schedule that, and it's difficult, right? Um, and the larger the organization, the more teams that are involved, the meeting space becomes more awkward. There's lots of reasons why there might be friction to getting a meeting like that set up. Long story short, though, is the larger the organization, the more important that meeting becomes because the more likely it is that you're not meeting together because you might have an all hands for your department, but you don't necessarily have an interactive session where different teams and different departments are coming together. So how do I go about setting it up? First and foremost, it just needs a lot of planning. I think it's trying to outline the value to everybody. So it's not really being run by any one team for their benefit. It's for the benefit of everyone. I think the second thing is to make sure that you've got a realistic amount of time to achieve it and a really clear set of objectives about what's going to happen at the end. So again, I'd look for a large room where we can get everyone in, and I remove all the chairs so everyone's standing. That keeps us up, keeps us mobile, and within the first 10 minutes, everyone should have a sticky note in their hand and the first question going. But getting in the room is the hard part. There is no easy way of doing that. It will depend on your organization, but it's about really just selling the value of it. And I think most leaders will value that level of feedback. Again, it's not directed at any one team. It's an open forum where everyone can understand what's going on in the org. Because in most organizations, there's no department that's looking after that big piece. It's all falling in between the cracks.
Yeah. The other thing I've seen to be successful is having executive sponsorship and stakeholders across the functional parts of the organization so that they can bring their constituents together. The second is slightly more nuanced, but really important is what's in it for me? Explaining to them, why should you be joining this meeting? What's in it for you, right? We're going to learn about your business. Finance is going to teach us something that we probably don't know about, which I guarantee is the case. They're going to teach, technology teams are going to teach finance about things that they don't know about, which is guaranteed to be the case. And I just think it's a great learning experience. But humans want to know what's in it for them. And it's also really important to have executive stakeholders to bring everybody together.
And look as well, as you begin to get more and more people signed up, it begins to get a little bit easier to get other people to come as well, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's just one or two people per team. You don't want to all of security turn up, but only one person from finance, right?
Yeah.
Want a good, healthy balance across the org.
Yeah. So Brian, in your opinion, when it comes to, the broad organization working together for kind of productivity, cost efficiency gains, developer enjoyment gains, like there's a lot of metrics that are a bit anecdotal or just really difficult to manage. So what metrics should one use to measure platform engineering success beyond adoption rates?
Well, isn't that a very good question? Um, Perhaps we begin by just thinking about the poll questions that we've had back. So we've heard that one of the main priorities for platform engineering is around developer productivity, doing more with what we have or doing more with less. But we've also just heard as well that developer experience just now is holding back that productivity. So I think, first of all, it's to understand there's two things at play. When we think about metrics, we often jump straight into data, things that we can measure and factual things that we can be hard and fast on. And things like DORA, for example, usually is top of the list when companies are looking at metrics frameworks. However, DORA is incredibly useful for a team to understand trends as a lagging metric, what's going on in their team, but it doesn't give a good story around perception. So to highlight that, if we think about speed, and again, I'll use the car analogy because it's the easiest and there's nothing better than reusing an old story. But if we think about car, you can be traveling really quickly in a high performance car and it doesn't feel very fast. Or you can be in a go-kart where you're only doing 20 miles an hour or 20 kilometers per hour, but it feels like you're going a lot faster.
Mhm.
I think that many IT teams, especially on the engineering and operations side, struggle with this. And that is where developers or the rest of the business have a perception that IT is too slow. But yet, IT, when they measure how quick they are, they're not slow. Like it takes 15 minutes to do a security scan. Okay, well, we'll try and bring that down to 10. Spoiler alert, that's not going to help. That's not the perception that's causing people to have that opinion. So I think it's important when we look at metrics to think about not just the tech side, but the human aspect as well. Like what does it feel like for other people to use? And that can be as simple as, is a system painful to use, or is the user interface actually quite nice? Is it responsive and quick, or is it a web page that takes a couple of seconds or to reload, or every time you fill in details, or the cut and paste doesn't work, or something super annoying like it's asking you for details that should have been looked up elsewhere? Doesn't slow the process down that much, but it certainly feels like a long time when you're there. So metrics, I think there's the good balance between perception and factuals. When we think about some of the metrics out there, so we've got space, which was pretty wide and broad around what it measures, but it was also so wide that I think most organizations struggle to work out what exactly they're going to measure. And then we've got others that kind of fall in the gaps. But I think something like Dora is a really good place for people to start because it's simple. It's effectively suggesting that a team should monitor four things. How frequently can we deploy? So if we're deploying frequently, what does that look like? And it's not about bigger is better. It's just understanding whether that number is going up or down. And is that a good or a bad thing for your organization or for your team more specifically? The next one is, how long does it take for a change to happen, going from a first commit to getting it into production? And that's just maybe a good measure of how good that governance process is. Again, faster isn't necessarily better. It's just good to understand whether, from a process perspective, it's getting faster or slower over time. We then have the kind of balancing measure of that, which is great. You might be deploying quickly, and it might only take 10 seconds to get it deployed. But if every change fails, that's bad. So the next one we look at is the change failure rate. How often is that not working well? And then, of course, our all-time favorite from systems engineering is our mean time to recovery. So when a change does go bad, how quickly can we get back to a working state for our users? Now, the things I like about Dora is, first of all, it's very prescriptive. And these are measurements that you don't need expensive tools to do. You can do them on a piece of paper if needs be, but tools can obviously help. So it's really easy to get up and running. It also has this balance between things that make us go fast and measuring that our brake pedal's still working. And again, that can be important. If we think about Goodhart's law, like when does a metric, um, become a target and then bad things begin to happen? But the downsides with Dora is that I think I see a lot of organizations looking at Dora as a way to compare productivity across teams. And I think that's a huge anti-pattern. I think that a lot of the time when we think about metrics, we're looking for a quick answer. Well, what is everybody else doing? We'll just do what they're doing. They're not your business.
Yep.
Metrics have to be around your team and your business. And if they're not, then they're not good metrics.
Yep.
And you have to remember that whenever you start recording any metric, you will change the behaviors of individuals involved. You might not call it a target, but everyone is going to be thinking about it. And with engineers particularly, you have to be super careful. If you show me a metric that I'm being recorded part of, my human nature is going to be to engineer that metric to go higher or lower.
Mhm.
It's just going to change the nature of my work very, very gently. And engineers are phenomenal at that. It's a problem solving exercise, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think the key thing is that there's lots of frameworks out there. I wouldn't dive into any of them. I wouldn't use them as a tool to compare productivity across teams. I think what we really want to do is start with why do we want to measure something? So are we trying to change a behavior? Are we trying to showcase our value? Is it because we're interested in one particular part of a process? What is it we want to do? Starting there is a good place. And being clear about that too.
Yeah.
Second
Yep.
is that when we've got that metric, make them as small as humanly possible, but yet clever as possible. So again, Dora does a good job of this in terms of choosing them very carefully. They're not measuring 10 different metrics. They've worked out actually these four are a good measure of lots of things because they kind of compass it up.
Yeah.
And then that last one really is just be careful what you then do with them. As I say, I think Dora is a phenomenal tool for teams, but it becomes a weapon that is badly used. And my analogy that I always use is that if you're running a website, you probably want to be able to deploy quickly. You want to be doing multiple updates a day. If you're running retail in particular, absolutely. You want those numbers to be high. And failure rates, well, actually, if they fail a lot, that's not too much of a problem because it's just the web. We can fix that as long as our time to recover is low, right? We're making sensible decisions. If I am making cars, I'm in the automotive industry, I only want to do one deployment of software because I'm unlikely to change it in quite some time. And I want the change failure rate to practically be zero because recalls can destroy a firm. So again, understanding how you're going to use these metrics and how they relate to your business and your team is the vital thing. Do not cut and paste from others
Yep.
ever.
Yeah. There was an instance in a DORA analysis I was involved in where they were looking at generally developer productivity. There's philosophical debates in that sometimes you can see more junior developers releasing faster. And then, an executive that might not be technically inclined will say, why are we paying this senior developer this much when these junior developers are releasing so much quicker? Well, then it was a lesson in empathy. Well, these junior developers oftentimes have less complicated work to do and therefore warrant faster releases. The really complex problems are oftentimes solved by the senior developers. And look, the change failure rate is very low and the quality of code is very high. It's operationally resilient. So what they ended up doing is doing a cohort analysis. So they looked at different, seniority within developed organization. And that seemed to be a more effective way of analyzing the data.
I think there's some really important parts in there. I generally never use metrics to measure individuals. I think that they become very dangerous for just the reasons you highlighted there. The other one that I'd bring out is that there are there'll be people in your team that aren't necessarily showing the work that they're doing because they are the glue that holds the entire team together. They're the ones that are supporting others. It might not even be in issues and tickets and things. It might just be phone calls. It might be in Slack. It might be in other ways. But they are behind the scenes the oil of the engine, right? If you take the oil away, you get a bad outcome really quickly. So when it comes to looking at the performance of individuals, I generally shy away from metrics and I'm much more likely to look at things like 360 feedback from their teams and from those that are working with them and think about those ways. I think when we get down to, well, this person's deployed more, again, if you're going to measure people on deployments, I'll just start deploying lots of really small change. And if we're measured on failures, well, I'll just refuse to do any work that might result in a failure, right?
Yeah,
That's not the kind of safe environment that we want to build for developers. So yeah, how we use metrics, we need to be really careful about how we do that, especially when it's individuals.
definitely. Along these similar lines, there's so much new technology coming to market nowadays. And development and operation teams want to consume that new technology because it delivers oftentimes great productivity, a better developer experience, better operational resilience. How should one think about when building platform teams, those capabilities and them growing, exponentially, um, and really kind of weighing the value of bringing on a new technology and the use case requirement, because platform teams can only manage so much, where there's a bunch of unique requirements throughout an organization. How do you weigh that? How do you allow generally a smaller team to understand all this technology service to their consumers, but not adopting too much or not adopting too little? That oftentimes seems to be a difficult balance.
You're absolutely right. I think there's two parts hidden in there, right? I think the first one is um, how where's the right level of abstraction for, say, a developer in order to do the job that they need to do without having to learn everything in the stack. And I think the second is how do we control how big that stack gets so we don't end up with an army of people maintaining 1,000 tools that all fundamentally do the same? Because I certainly see that in organizations a lot. And this ties back to our polls and our questions around we've got different developer teams all fundamentally doing the same things, right? Developing code, having some kind of CI, having some kind of quality gates, hopefully doing some security checks, and then having a deployment system. Like these are not unique. We've been doing this in software for a very, very long time. But there's thousands of tools out there, and if we all use different tools, then we've now got a technology stack that is broad and varied and largely incompatible. So first things first, there is a fundamental difference between the priorities for developers and operations. And it's been there since time began. And that's why we had the wall that we used to throw software over. So developers are predominantly praised when they make changes quickly, because that's what the business wants to see. This is our app. We want to change it to have this new feature or build this new functionality. The faster we can get that into the hands of our customers, the better. And that is absolutely true. Operations live in a different world, though, right? And that is there's no glamour in sysadmin. And I know that because I was a sysadmin for many years. Operations are generally the silent janitors of an organization, and they only really get negative feedback when things don't work. So you end up with this really difficult dynamic between developers who need operations and engineers to do things, but those same people get in trouble or their lives are made more difficult depending on that input. So how do we go about managing that? Platform engineering, the goal is to provide a level of abstraction, first and foremost, that makes it easy for developers to do the right thing. So in other words, if we don't want to have 1,000 CI/CD tools out there, make yours good, make yours easy to use, build in sensible templates so that if I'm a new developer into an organization, I can easily find information about your CI/CD platform. It's well documented, it's easy to use, there's videos, maybe there's an onboarding process for it, which is, part of coming at the company, we learn about how the system works. It might be that you have templates, so it encodifies best practice for common constructs that developers are building all the time. And trust me, whenever a developer is starting a new thing, it's usually not from scratch. It's usually from some other piece of code. If we're calling a database or making an API call, we know how we're going to do that. We don't write that code from scratch. So how do
You,
we make how do we make it useful, right? And likewise, if it's security tooling, everything else, then you need to make it a feature. It needs to be something that developers get a benefit from. And I think this has been the problem in the history when we look at operations, is that operations and security have been the people that go, no, you can't do that. We can't go further forwards, but we're only telling you at the last point of delivery. We need to be working together so developers are aware of what they're going to get on day one. They know if they follow this process, they get a reliable output and they can trust that thing to work properly, the right time, every time, and it's self-service. They don't need to be slowed down or be waiting on anyone. So if we can do those things, I think first and foremost, that helps us. But all of a sudden, we're talking about developing a product, right? And that's the key of all of this, is that we want to turn this thing that we've been trying to do into a product that developers would choose to use because it's better to do that for them than have to go through the pain and suffering of building their own. Developers don't want to do that. They're doing that because the alternative isn't trustworthy or it's too difficult or there's just friction in getting it done. I'll
Yeah.
just do it myself. I'll just do it my way.
Let's go to the polls now that we have some time. But poll number three, what capability would deliver the most immediate value in your organization? This is along the same lines of what we've been discussing here. I'm curious to understand what the answers might be. You want to take a guess what's going to be top of the list, Brian?
I know what I want it to be, but I'll save that for a little bit. Um, I think that standardized CI pipelines are probably going to be top because most organizations have different tools and teams doing roughly the same thing, but they've got different ways of achieving it. And if we could all just work together on one thing, there'd be less tools to manage, there'd be more ability to share and collaborate on something, and the output would generally be better. But let's see what the results come back as. As I say, there's another one that I'd like to see top.
I was going to say, I was going to go with better documentation, quick start guides, examples of best practices.
And that's the one that I hoped would be top.
Okay.
Because if we've learned anything from this one conversation we've had, is that all the tech in the world is not gonna fix this people interaction problem. Whereas writing documentation is one of the most empathetic things that you can do in your organization. That is you literally spending time out of your day to make other people's days easier and better.
Yeah. I've got a question.
Hmm.
We're coming up close on time. I have a question for you, though. I've thought about this quite a bit, and I've seen varying degrees of maturity. So when a customer buys GitLab subscription, for example, the terms of service are clear, the SLAs are defined, documentation is there, there's readily available APIs that are well documented, and this is supplied to the customer in a formal way. So does it make sense for a platform engineering team to catalog the services, specify what those services consist of, host those APIs and document those APIs on behalf of the customers, document the SLAs like we do to our customers? Does it make sense to do that level of formality as a platform engineering team supplying services to their customers?
Long story, yes. Sorry, short story, yes. I think the longer, getting all mixed up. The real story here for me, and I've been using this since I started building platform teams a couple of years ago, shall we say. Um, and that is, I always looked at my team as almost being a company in itself. And that's perhaps I had a background in startups, so it made a lot of sense. But I used to cause all sorts of chaos because I would call our internal users of my platforms my customers. But of course, the company had customers too. But my argument was always, if these are the things that we're doing for our business customers, why would I not do them for my internal users who are effectively my customers? So, should GitLab be transparent about what you get when you buy something? Yes, I'd like to think we should do that. I think any company should do that when they're selling a product. Should we be clear about what happens when something goes wrong and what the expectations are? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Should we offer getting started guides? Should we offer help in getting people up and running? Should we offer kind of customer success management along the way to make sure people are always getting the value? Should we communicate on a regular basis about the new features that are coming out? Should we get feedback from our customers rather than just building stuff we think's cool? Should we ask them what's going to be most useful? Yes. So if you think about your team as a small company, immediately you begin to think of things like marketing and sales and customer success and customer service. These are not dirty words in IT. These are the way that we transform what has traditionally been tickets and operations to something that is platform as a product. And this is how we get individuals involved in what we want to do and get them on board with using our platform rather than building themselves. It's about trust. It's about them choosing and entrusting us to do a piece of that puzzle for them. So
Yeah,
yes, you should definitely do those things and much, much more.
yeah, yeah. Great answer. I've appreciated the conversation. You've enlightened me and brought a lot of good insight. I hope everybody joining this webcast today felt the same. As we wind down, thank you for attending today's webcast. We appreciate and respect your time. We hope you found this of value. If you did find it to be of value, you'll receive an email with the recording of this, and you can pass it on to the relevant parties within your organization. So to close, platform engineering isn't just hype. It's a valuable evolution of DevSecOps. So if you're interested in understanding more about how GitLab aligns with enabling DevSecOps platforms within your organization, and how GitLab can support your platform engineering initiatives, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help. We're here to help educate. If you're using GitLab, thank you. Fantastic. If you're not using GitLab, we're happy to talk to you about alternative ways to think about this. You may have a great tooling and process in place, but we're here to work with you however we can. So thank you all for your time, and please take care.
Thank you, folks.